Hello and welcome to the Rewind, where we dive into the making and legacy of various films, from cult classics to award-winning masterpieces. Today's film is Lord of Illusions, a horror mystery that stars Scott Bakula as Harry D'Amour, a private detective haunted by past experiences with the supernatural, who takes on a case involving a popular stage illusionist named Philip Swan and a cult leader and a sorcerer named Nyx. Also starring Famke Janssen, Kevin J. O'Connor, and Daniel Van Bargen, Lord of Illusions is the third and so far final film to be directed by the legendary horror writer Clive Barker, and the movie is based on his short story The Last Illusion from his Books of Blood, Volume 6. And joining me today to talk all things Lord of Illusions is Eric Walkuski, managing editor at Arrow and Ahead and film critic for Joe Blow. And Eric, thank you so very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me back, Matt. It's hard to believe I was looking it up. I think the last time I was on was in February of this year.
Hmm.
It does not feel that long ago because we're doing this in, I guess, early September, and it feels like yesterday I was on here talking about In the Mouth of Madness. So it's been time is moving along really quickly. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
That was my first rewatch. Sorry, my first rewind episode I've done in the Mouth of
Right, right.
Madness, 1995, and here we are again with another 1995 underrated horror classic by another,
Hmm.
you know, person who is known as an icon within the horror genre in Clive Barker. Um, but before we get into Barker and his movie, I just want to ask you, Eric, do you remember the first time you saw Lord of Illusions?
I do. I saw this movie in the theater. I was 15 years old, right in the prime of my horror. You know, just I guess I started getting really into horror movies probably around 10 or 11. So by the time I
Hmm.
was 15, I was like a horror head, and I was just like seeking out everything. Any horror movie that opened, I was there opening weekend if I could be. Just like In the Mouth of Madness, I remember we talked about that. I saw that opening weekend. Lord of Illusions, I saw a theater that still exists not far from me. Um, and it's funny because I remember going to a Fangoria convention, I think a few months prior to it, and Clive Barker was there signing posters for the movie. And this was when I don't know how unusual this was, but like back then, um, you could get an autograph from a famous horror person for free. They weren't even
Hmm.
charging you money. They were just like happy to be signing stuff. And I remember getting my Lure of Illusions poster signed by him. I hadn't even seen the movie yet because it hadn't come out yet. And he was as nice as could be. I'm sure you've seen him talk and listen to him. He's as eloquent and intelligent as any gorehound could possibly be. And it was a pleasure meeting him. And then I remember seeing the movie opening weekend, and then it sort of became a cable staple after that. And so this is a movie I've seen many, many, many times, and I know it very well. Just to bone up, I did watch it like 2 days ago. But yeah, I've seen this movie several times in my life. So, and I'm a huge fan of it, as we'll get into.
Cable stapled is my story here. First time I saw it. So I think very similar to In the Mouth of Madness when we spoke last time. Cable here in Australia came real late, around 94, 95, around that time. Maybe 96 even I might have saw it. So I would have been around 14, 15 years old, and similar age as you, and just absorbing all different types of movies, especially horror. I was just always been just attracted to horror movies and always still am.
Yeah.
And I remember I just flicking around, and it was the scene at the start where the Nick's character is with the Colton order, and straight away it kind of grabbed me. It's like, what the hell is this? It's
Yeah.
like it's quite a way to begin a movie, right?
No, it's
And
awesome.
just everything that goes on with it. And I remember rewatching it like a few times after that. Absolutely loved the. And I always have been a fan of the whole kind of like detective horror movie.
Hmm.
There's some really good ones like Angel Heart and
Yeah.
Constantine is like I think I guess
Mm.
you could say a recent example. It's been like what 10, 15 years since that came out, but this is like firmly in there as one of the better ones of those movies. So I was real immediately attracted to the material, and then also it comes down to the fact that it was Clive Barker. And I think
Hmm.
we just have to talk about him just a little bit here before we get into it, because some people are out there because Clive Barker I know the Hellraiser remake came out like a few years ago, but maybe he's like not as well known with certain generations as he is for us, because for us, we grew up with a lot of his stuff,
Yeah.
the put together the Hellraiser franchise based on his story. Pinhead, I still believe to be one of the great horror monster movies. Candyman series inspired from his works. He did Nightbreed as well. He has all the books. He has graphic novels. He has all sorts of stuff. He is, I think, when it comes down to like influences in horror, say over the last 50 years, he has to be up there in the top three for
Oh yeah.
sure, I think, right?
He is, and it's funny. I can just go right over here real quick, and right off my bookshelf, I've got Books of Blood, which
Hmm.
is, if you guys haven't read this, this is like one of the greatest horror anthologies of all time. It's like there's not a a bad story in this book. It's incredible. And then of course, Inhuman Condition. I've got Hellbound Heart over there, which was Hellraiser. And yeah, he's an icon. He really is, and his artwork is great. He's just an interesting guy to listen to if you ever listen to him in an interview. And it's crazy because I knew this fact, of course, we all know this, but like when you say he's only directed three movies and this is his last directorial effort, it's so hard to believe because it feels
Mm.
like he's such a major presence in the genre, and he is, of course, but it's still so hard to believe that he's only directed three movies. And I think he had a really tough time directing Nightbreed, as
Yeah.
we all know, and I think he had a bit of a tough time directing Lord of Illusions as well. And before the new Hellraiser came out, there was a rumor that he was going to direct the remake or the reboot or whatever, and that never came to pass. I thought the remake was like pretty decent. Like I've got complaints about it, but I liked it overall. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's just like one of those names that's synonymous with the genre. You can't even people who aren't horror people know the name Clive Barker. So
Mm.
that's how important he is to the genre.
You mentioned you just showed us the Books of Blood right there, the anthology book series.
Yeah,
So a lot of Illusions. So that was the 1985 story, The Last Illusion. So it's in volume six of
right,
the Books of
right.
Blood. So we're dealing with this main character named Harry D'Amour, and you can tell Clive Barker's a writer because that's just a great bloody name for a
Yeah.
character. So the short story is a little different in regards to the book in regards to some aspects, but what like Clive Barker said when he wanted to make this movie, he said a couple of things. The first one was that he felt that like the whole kind of like horror monster kind of guy, evil presence villain as the main player was kind of like running its course by that time. So we're
Mhm.
talking like 94, 95. So, and a lot of those guys, kind of like your Freddys and your Michaels and Jasons, pretty much were out of the picture. Will be Scream, will come out the year after and
Yeah,
kind of
that
revamp
was a
some of
tough.
that.
95 was like a really like just a down period for the horror genre in general.
And so he's like, I want to do where the hero is the main character. So he's got this guy, Harry D'Amour, who's a really just incredibly interesting character in that. Um, and they talk about him more in the books, but he's just seems to always be drawn to kind of like these supernatural incidents, these kind of dark things. And he's got these tattoos on him that supposedly ward off evil
Mhm.
spirits and all that. That's why you see Scott Bakula with that stuff. I watched it recently, and they don't really address the tattoos in the movie, from what I remember, but there could be like a
He
deleted scene somewhere.
Yeah, he's got one on his back that's like prominent, but and Scott he gets Scott Bakula shirtless a few times in
Hmm.
this movie, so you see the tat on the back, but yeah, I don't think it's as prominent as the character in the books, because he's a reoccurring character in like
Yeah.
a few Clive Barker books. So, um, and I can't remember because it's been a long time since I read any of those stories, but I don't know how close Scott Bakula is to the character that he first created. But and you'll go on with this, but he I mean it's great casting because he looks for all the world like a sort of a 1950s private eye.
It's funny you say that because later on, I think like in the early 2000s, when they had like alternate sleeve jackets for maybe it was a graphic novel or some of the some books where Harry Dean Moore was the main character, they actually had Thomas Jane on the cover of these things
Oh, right,
portraying
yeah.
Harry
That's
Dean Moore. So
interesting.
That's Thomas Jane Bakula. You can see a type that he's kind of looking for,
Sure,
a
yeah.
kind of noirish kind of, guy who can do those kind of
Hmm.
parts. And to me, what I really love about this movie is, like I said, that aspect. But Harry Dean Moore, just as a character, I think is prime to have some type of series based around him or something. Like
Yeah,
if Clive Barker wanted to do like something extra, like in the, I know they did the Books of Blood and Hulu, didn't really work out that well. It was like a movie kind of based on his stuff. But if he wanted to do something like tap into kind of like a series or something, I think The Adventures of Harry Dean Moore in
yeah,
different kind of it could be news stories, it could be based on the stuff that he's already done because he's appeared in a number of different kind of things. Even at one point, supposedly he meets the Cenobites and Pinhead
right,
during one of
right.
those things. So I'm thinking it's like based in the same world, that kind of Clive Barker universe of dark entities.
Yeah.
But I don't. But Eric, I'd watch that in a heartbeat, man.
Of course, yeah, I would love to see that. Yeah, as you say, he almost seems primed for like an X-Files type of show or something like that, or maybe series of
Kolchak.
movie. Yeah, Kolchak for sure. Evil, like one of those. And he's like a Philip Marlowe character from like the 40s, 50s, but just battling demons and stuff. And he's a hard drinker. When we first meet him, he's all hungover and drinking a beer at like in the morning and stuff, which is like a classic trope. But it works, and he Barker plays with those tropes throughout the movie, where it's like the private eye, the damsel in distress, the big villain, the missing husband or missing character who may be dead, maybe isn't. He seems to be having fun with that, and the movie is fun. Like, it's a fun movie. It's like a page turner of a movie. Like, every scene leads to the next scene, and like you're always on the edge of your seat. It's never taking itself too seriously. I feel like there's a lot of
Hmm.
humor in the movie. And he does that pretty well. Like, Nightbreed has some funny stuff in it. Hellraiser has some tongue-in-cheek stuff in it. But this is probably the funniest of the three. And yeah, it's a great. I love that idea of doing the private eye movie, but just he's battling an evil sorcerer, and he just had a demonic encounter in Brooklyn before
That's right.
before the movie even starts. He's been battling a demon. And that's haunting him. It's like a cloud over his head while he goes into this next thing. Because of course he's not supposed to be finding an evil sorcerer. He kind of stumbles into it while he's doing another job in LA.
It was supposed to be kind of like a working holiday kind of situation to kind of keep his
Yeah,
mind off
yeah.
things. But like we mentioned, he just kind of he's drawn to these kind of people and characters and scenarios, and that's where
Hmm.
kind of like the fascination with that kind of character comes from.
Hmm.
He can't get away from it. The Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you'll love. The
Yeah,
other part that Barker talked about is that he's of his love of illusionists in mid 90s. That was like prime
yeah,
Copperfield, like all that kind of stuff, right? So that was happening quite a
right,
lot. That was like the show to see in Vegas and all that. And he was talking about how the whole aspect of the illusionist, there's stories about death and resurrection. It's like someone gets killed and then they come back, or they disappear and they're on the other side, or some type
right.
of death-defying thing going on. And so he actually really loved that kind of the subtext with a lot of that stuff. And it goes into a lot of the things that like Barker gets into. He talks his stuff. I find, and I'm talking more kind of like from the movie aspect. I haven't read any of his novels, but I'm talking more as like a filmmaker stories in there. Is about kind of like death, the afterlife, resurrection, and
Hmm.
spirits, demons, all that kind of stuff. But it's like done in a particular kind of quirky kind of subtext. Because Clive
Hmm.
Barker brings in kind of like sexual elements to that kind of stuff as
Oh
well.
yeah, of course.
Because that's really, a really kind of big part of kind of like his, and maybe that's what maybe why it's, I don't know, maybe these days, some trying to get some of these stuff off the ground, it doesn't have that much allure to maybe producers stuff, and I don't know, because there's always that subtext there. But it's really interesting
Right.
how like these, it's kind of like an old school kind of like you said Philip Marlowe 40s noirish kind of thing meets
Hmm.
this kind of very 90s illusionist kind of aspect, and kind of clash together as
Yeah.
only Clive Barker can do it. I absolutely love
Well,
the mix of those things.
I also love the idea that in this the Swan character, he's this like world famous illusionist. He's actually using magic for real, but
Hmm.
he's pretending it's fake because that's what sells tickets. The idea of like a guy who can actually do this magic stuff, um, but basically just kind of selling himself as an illusionist is a really funny thing. And the movie has like a very cynical view of LA, I think. Like it has a very particularly scanted view of LA, like how superficial it is, and they're always talking about how nice the weather is, and that's kind of all it's got going for it. But it's all just these parties and fancy mansions, and of course Harry is like a Brooklyn guy, so he's like not into any of that crap. Um, but yeah, I just love the idea of like a magician who's kind of sold his soul just to lay low, make some money, and he's just dreading the inevitable, which of course eventually happens. Um, and yeah, it's a fascinating character. And all these characters in this movie are like really interesting. All the side characters, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit, they're pretty uh particularly drawn. I think it's not just like throwaway characters on the sidelines of the movie. Like he does a really good job with casting and also giving some of these characters some interesting quirks. Especially some of the villains are really interesting.
Let's go to the casting. So Scott Bakula, as we said, as Harry D'Amour. For me, Scott Bakula is always going to tie it in with Quantum Leap. That's kind of like how I was introduced to him when I was a kid, and he's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like one of those kind of steady hands. You bring him onto a project, you know you're going to get good work from him. He's just a really kind of great kind of like a journeyman actor in that regard. Supposedly, Bakula and both Barker both said that Scott Bakula was the guy always for the role. Now, I saw
Hmm.
some little tidbit about maybe Christopher Reeve was like maybe looked at for it, but I couldn't find any confirmation of that. So,
Interesting.
and Bakula himself said that, like, that Clive Barker kind of said to him, you're the guy, you're the one who I want for this because he has that kind of 40s kind of, you could do that 40s kind of film noir
Yeah,
detective thing and all that stuff.
he's got the
And
chiseled jawbone and everything.
everything like that. He's like even that's why I think he works so well in Quantum Leap too, because he can go to these different periods and different parts and
Mm,
make that all work. And I think he's just fantastic in a role because a
yeah,
lot of the times he's like on screen maybe like 80% of the time in this
yeah,
movie. And he's
yeah,
driving the plot forward and everything. And I think like when it comes to film wise, and I think when it comes to Scott Bakula, we think more of the TV side. But
yeah.
film wise, I think it's his best role that he's done.
I remember, and maybe you can confirm this if you've done some heavy duty research recently, but like I remember hearing Clive Barker saying, and this was back when the movie came out, that Quantum Leap was like beloved and it had like a real big fan base, and like some of the huge fans of that show were like upset that Scott Bakula had been cast in this movie, which is got all this violence and gore and sex in it, and I guess this is kind of right pre-internet days. Um, uh, Clive Barker would get letters and stuff from people being like, "How could you put him in this movie?
Hmm.
Like, what are you doing to our beloved Scott Bakula?" And he was like, "I'm sorry, he's an actor. He's not, But he had that, because of Quantum Leap, he was just such a wholesome, figure, and that's what everybody associated him with. So to see him in this context is pretty entertaining, and when you bring that kind of like, oh, he's just like that's this nice guy from Quantum Leap, but he's in this like really messed up movie. That's a lot of fun, and yeah, he's terrific. I think it's great casting. I can't think of anybody else who would have pulled off the role quite as well as he would have or did.
Another person in the film, Famke Janssen, as Dorothea. So supposedly Clive Barker picked her just based purely on a photograph, and you can see why.
Yeah.
I mean, she's just still is
Mm,
incredibly beautiful. And 95
yeah.
was a huge year for her because 92 she had Lord of Illusions, but GoldenEye came out that year too.
GoldenEye. That's right.
I forgot what was the character's name again. I totally forgot. Something silly, I'm sure.
Dorothea, I believe.
No, the character's name in GoldenEye. I'm trying to
It was
remember.
I'm sorry. It was Xenia
Is
Onatopp.
that's
Xenia
you gotta
Onatopp.
you gotta love like whoever's writing these Bond scripts, you gotta
Brilliant.
love how they just home run right there. Great, great,
Why not? Yeah, go
great
for it.
cast, and she's crushing people with her thighs in that movie. This
Yes,
movie
who
though,
could
she's
forget
like
that?
more of a, she's more kind of like a I wouldn't say she's kind of like the damsel in distress. I mean, she does hold her own in some ways, but she's kind of like the glue that like links like this cult leader to like
Hmm.
the present day situation. She's like the one thing that's kind of like, draws it all together. And I think she's just absolutely fantastic in her role. Not only is she like incredibly beautiful, but her and
Yeah,
Bakula have really good chemistry throughout the movie as
yeah,
well. And I think like when it comes to that kind of 40s noirish kind of aspect, you need to have that kind of really strong, striking, leading lady played in the way that Famke played in this movie. I think she's just fantastic in it.
for sure. And it's interesting because she's not, we all know that Famke is like very tall.
Yeah.
She's gorgeous. She's kind of intimidating. I've met her. I've interviewed her in person, and she was always sitting down, but she's like a formidable presence. You know what I mean? Um, and it's interesting, yeah, that she's the female lead in this movie because she's not a shrinking violet. She's not like this frail, like helpless damsel. But she's gorgeous, as you said, and she fulfills the role of like a woman that we want to see helped and taken care of, but she's not like just a pathetic, you
Yeah.
know, needing a man to save her type of
Not she's
character.
not a
I mean,
wilting flower.
right, exactly. And it's what's cool is like when we see her as a kid, the character, she's the one that takes down Nix to
Yeah.
basically kickstart his long slumber under the dirt. So the character has some balls, which is cool, and yeah, she's great casting. I mean, anytime she's in a movie, I'm there. She's great.
Then you have Kevin J. O'Connor, who's Philip Swan. He's kind of like the illusionist in the movie, the David Copperfield type character in the film. Kevin J. O'Connor, a lot of people probably know him more as Benny in the Mummy series than anything else. But he's, sometimes there's certain actors who have certain faces, and I think faces like
Hmm.
blend are really great for genre work, especially. Kevin J. O'Connor is one of those guys. Like he pops up in different films, but like you remember that face like every time. Like
Yeah,
I don't, you might see him in The Mummy or this film, or later on he'll be in There Will Be Blood playing the fake
yeah,
brother of Daniel Day-Lewis, and you're
yeah.
like, oh, no, that guy. He's still like a that guy kind of thing. But this, I think, is definitely his most kind of beefiest, biggest role that he's had in his career.
Well, he's also in Deep Rising,
Yeah,
opposite
that's
Famke
right.
Janssen,
But that's
which
right.
is like
Yes.
so funny, like watching them in that movie versus this movie, where she's kind of like beholden to him because he saved her life when she was a kid. But it's like they're married, I guess, but it's like a It's not a real marriage. It's like they're kind of like in a weird agreement that's like he's kind of protecting her. They're not really in love, but it's like they're almost like friends with benefits or something.
Hmm.
But and they're both so like terrific in Deep Rising. I mean, that could be a different show altogether one day. But yeah, he's great, and he's what I think is interesting about him in this role is that he's like the character's really he's got a lot of power. He's a strong character, but he's like really fragile. You could tell
Hmm.
he's always like kind of this close to like just like losing it. And he kind of disappears from the movie for a little while, and then we pick up with him towards the beginning of the third act, and yeah, he just seems like he's like on the brink of like losing it. But it's great casting because if you cast a guy who was like a little more badass, like I don't know, it would just upset the dynamic between him
I think
and
so.
Harry. I think
Yeah.
so. Like I think it's great casting, and yeah, he's a terrific performer, as you said. Anything he's in, and I remember when I was watching There Will Be Blood for the first time, I was like, no way did they get Kevin J. O'Connor to play Daniel Day Lewis's brother. I mean, what inspired casting that was.
Yeah.
And he's still, he's still out there. He still pops up and stuff. So more, I'm all for more Kevin J. O'Connor whenever Hollywood wants to make that happen. I'm there for it.
Another actor who's kind of like one of those that guy actors is Daniel von Bargen. He plays the role of
Mm-hmm.
Nix, the cult leader, the sorcerer, the kind of like demonic kind of presence in the film. It's really interesting. Barker was talking about how around that time in the 90s, the character is really inspired by all these kind of like um, um, there's all these kind of mass deaths happening in cults at that time. Like
Yeah.
in he mentioned specifically, he talked about Waco. He talked about Jonestown, talked about Manson, but one he said specifically about was this cult called the Order of the Solar Temple. And I don't know if you ever heard of them before. I just listened to it like I did a deep dive on them. These guys were crazy. This is like in the mid 90s. It was a cult that um, had to do with kind of like old Templar traditions, but it had other stuff in there as well. At the end of it, over the span of like a year, 74 people when this cult killed himself. And
Whoa.
it was like in Switzerland, France, and in Quebec as well. So if you
Yeah.
ever get a chance, if anyone out there likes like cults, like that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
definitely trying to check them out, even on a podcast, whatever. It's fascinating stuff. But he was
Wow.
kind of like thinking of that when it came to Nix, and when he kind of first approached Daniel Van Bargen, the actor said he just saw blood in the script and he didn't want to do it. But then he read some
Right.
more
Right.
about it and he spoke to Clive about it. He's like, "Oh, you're thinking this kind of thing and that kind of thing," and he's terrific in the film. He's really
Yeah.
chilling, which is kind of funny because I remember watching a lot of his work in TV comedies. I remember he was in Seinfeld for a lot. He was
Yep.
in Malcolm in the Middle for a lot, like these kind of
Hmm.
these really great kind of like 90s, early 2000s comedies. And to see him like do like a real kind of villainous character,
Yeah.
like he does in this movie, it kind of went, oh man, he's just he's just fantastic in this film because not only does he have a kind of like intimidating kind of stare about him as well, but
Hmm.
just the direct way he kind of talks to people. That's what you
Yeah.
kind of need. You need to have that kind of that scary charisma for a
Yeah.
role like that. So you can understand why people in the movie are kind of smashing glass bottles and falling to their knees and ripping out their hair and doing all this stuff. Because this
Right.
guy is like he comes across as like the ultimate kind of like embodiment of this evil cult leader guy.
Hmm.
And I think it's one of the best performances in the film, if not the best performance in the film.
Yeah. And he's got a great voice. Like he's got a great
Yeah.
voice for all this dialogue. What I always loved about it was when we first meet him, in that first sequence. Um, the character is not like an impressive looking guy. He is like shabby. He's
Mm.
kind of like he's got his stomach sticking out. He's like wearing just like his dirty old robe. He's like unshaven. His hair's all over the place, and I think that's great because like that's probably what it is like. And these cult like guys, they're probably not impeccably dressed and like all showered and shaved and stuff. They're probably looking like a mess because
Mm.
it's not about what they say, what they look like. It's about what they say, and he's yeah, he embodies that, as you said, and he's a fascinating character. And I love that. I remember reading a quote from Barker where he's like, Nick's, he loves talking, he loves to hear himself talk.
Yes.
um Pinhead loves talking, he loves to hear himself talk. Candyman loves talking, he loves to hear himself. He's like all these like major horror guys that I created. If you put them all in a room together, you would not get a word in edgewise. Like these guys just these guys are just always chatting. But yeah, no, it's a great character, and he's not in the movie a ton, but like the amount of time he's in, he definitely leaves an impression.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere. The crazy thing about that role is and I rewatched the movie like a week ago, and which I totally forgot about, is that at the start of the film he's got like a pet baboon or something like that
Oh right,
that
yes.
starts clawing at the younger version of Famke Janssen's character. I'm just
Yeah,
like, that's so random. Like you
where
wouldn't
did
think of
that
seeing
come
stuff
from?
like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, that's again like
But it's a
another.
good touch. It's a great touch that you don't forget, right? I mean, it's just like that is an intimidating creature right there.
It is, and it's a very much again comes back to like that kind of Clive Barkerisms where he puts things in his stories, in his movies that just kind of put you off kilter, and you're just like, well, this
Hmm.
is like this is a different kind of mind we're dealing with now, when it
Hmm.
comes to this film. So the movie itself, it started filming in July 27 of 1994. They shot in several locations. You got the Mojave Desert, which I'm sure which what was featured in the beginning and end of the film. The Pantages Theater in Hollywood, that was where they did the whole stage show. There's the big one with Swan with the swords, which I think when I was watching it again, um, I know what's going to happen, but it's such a well set up thing. I mean,
It's great.
to
Yeah.
to die in that way with the swords coming down, and you see the
Yeah.
shot of the sword and the blood and everything else. I mean, that was just brutal, man. That was
And
something else.
I love how people are like it takes like three or four swords
Yeah,
before people start like getting up and be like, "Is this supposed to be happening?" Like it's
yeah.
like, and that's I guess that's legit because that's his whole thing. Like he's like, "Is this supposed to be? Is this part of the trick, or is he fucking with us, or is this like a major emergency right now?" And there's they packed that house. That's a real house. That's not CGI crowd, which is really
Mm.
cool. Like they sell that sort of glamorous stage show aspect of it.
And then also Clive Barker said that he storyboarded the whole thing. It took like 6 months. He hired two guys, Martin Mercer and Mike Baird, and they storyboarded the whole movie, which I think
Hmm.
is pretty cool. I always love whenever I talk to filmmakers and they talk about their processes and they do storyboards. And I think
Yeah.
storyboards are a really kind of cool way to, and I love watching kind of like documentaries and you see the storyboards and how it kind of
Hmm.
lays out. I think it's all pretty cool.
Well,
Um,
he's also such a talented artist. His
yeah.
storyboards are probably really awesome.
Yeah, I imagine so as well. Something we need to talk about in the film, which is there's a question that I do this thing called Saturday Conversation, and I talk to filmmakers, writers, whatever, and I always ask them a question when I have this kind of choose between two segment, practical effects or CGI. What would you rather watch in the film? So we are smack bang in 1995, and this film comes out, and on one end you got some really cool kind of practical effects stuff. I really dug the mask they put on Nick's, and you see
Yeah,
the screws kind of coming in and out and all that stuff.
yeah,
I think that stuff's really cool. But there are moments in the film as well where Barker's kind of playing with CGI kind of stuff. There's a
hmm,
an attack at the mansion, like a demonic attack. So I think it's supposed to be an embodiment of Nyx who kind of comes there. And
right,
maybe in 95 it would have been pretty impressive, but watching it like in 2025, it
yeah,
it doesn't look good at all. I mean,
it's rough.
it's really rough as well. Um, when you when you I think the 90s especially, when you watch movies that are made in the 90s and such, and that kind of stuff kind of comes up, what's kind of like your reaction when seeing it? Because I remember I saw it and I just kind of forgot about it. And I just went,
Mm,
oh no, oh
yeah,
God, don't tell me that's what they kind of did. And and sometimes it's hard to kind of recommend movies and then like a scene where that will come up and people just get like right out of it because it
yeah,
does, you see kind of Oz behind the curtain when that happens. What was your reaction when you
yeah.
watch it again and it came up?
You know, I guess it depends on the movie. Thankfully, this movie, I don't feel like it has a ton of CGI. And I of course know exactly the scene you're talking about, and it is rough. Um, I think it depends for me. It's like I have a lot of affection for this movie, and I've
Mm,
always liked it. And I think even like back in '95, it wasn't necessarily even that good looking, to be honest. And we were starting to have good CGI back then. We already had T2 and Jurassic Park and stuff. So like
yeah.
it was still in its infancy, but we had seen good CGI. Um, and obviously this movie didn't have the budget of those. But I don't know. I guess it doesn't throw me off so much, but it's probably because I've seen the movie so many times that I'm used to it. I feel like if I recommended this movie to somebody, I wouldn't really worry about that kind of thing because it's such a small aspect of it, and it's like, all right, you can get past that. It's like a 30-second sequence or whatever. The rest of the movie looks so cool. It's so well photographed. The production design is really great. The costume design, everything is like so good looking, and the practical effects. So like that doesn't take away for me. It's when it's like a movie that's relying on the CGI, like if we're talking like an asylum movie or something where it's Crocosaurus or something that looks like just absolute garbage, that's one thing, and you can't take it seriously. In this case, it doesn't throw me off too much. I don't. It's not a big bother for me.
We touched on before Clive Barker, kind of like in the past, he's kind of run into studio heads when it comes to film. Nightbreed is a really big example of that. He had a lot of
Yeah.
problems with that film, and he did have problems with this film as well. So supposedly, MGM, the distributor film of the film, said that the film was too long, and they wanted
Right.
to cut out dialogue scenes in which, and I imagine for Barker, who's like, he wrote the original story, he adapts it for the screen.
Yeah.
That would have just been like terrible to do. 12 minutes of dialogue scene supposedly was removed
Yeah.
and from the scene. And a lot of these kind of things happen in between kind of like more horror elements. Um, and he said okay as long as he could get a director's cut
Right.
later on as well. Um, I'm trying to think though. what version have we been watching? We've been watching the original or director's cut? Like, is there a
I've
director's cut? I'm not sure.
there there is a director's cut on Scream Factory released the Blu-ray. I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. The director's cut is only well, actually, I watched the director's cut. I think it's about 5 or 6 minutes longer than the theatrical, but it is all dialogue scenes, and it's not major stuff. It's exposition. It's not like you're missing big chunks of it. You're not missing big chunks of gore or anything like that. So I'm mostly familiar with the theatrical cut, though. That's the one that was always on cable. And that one's about 109 minutes, so an hour and 49 minutes, which is lengthy for a horror movie. And I think the director's cut is like about 5 or 6 minutes longer than that. But I think you can stick with the theatrical because that's the version I've always known. That's the version I grew up with. You're not missing a ton when you watch that versus the director's cut.
So the
And
film comes out. Go ahead.
I think they might have cut stuff that's never been shown that we've never seen because I think they meddled with him beyond that. But maybe there's footage that we'll never see.
Well, Barker did also say that they had a test screening and audiences reacted negatively to explicit sex. I don't really remember much explicit sex. If anything, it seemed very stylized in the movie,
Not really. Yeah.
and said that there were too many dialogue heavy scenes. I think that maybe there could be a scene with the cult and maybe they're getting their freak on or something, and maybe that could be
All
the
right.
explicit sex because there is that moment where who was the Eddie Monster looking guy in the movie. I think his name's Butterfield. I think it was like the
Yeah,
the
Butterfield. Yeah.
head henchman of Nix. He's kind of like he just unearthed Nix and he's kind of like taking the mask off. And then the
Yeah.
cult's in another room and getting a little bit crazy. I think there might have been scenes with them that
Right.
could have possibly be the kind of like the explicit sex kind of stuff, and maybe he
An
just left it out
orgy of some
because
kind. Yeah.
yeah, you know how they do. It's all about
Yeah.
masks and orgies with these people. Um, August 25, 1995 is when it came out. So it had a budget of 11 million. Barely scraped out at a box office at 13.3 million. But this is a film to me, I think this was like a prime cable kind of VHS
Hmm.
style movie, especially cable. That's where I watched it.
Yeah.
Well, it was kind of big at that time. I I'd imagine as well, Eric, that this will be kind of like a cable movie
Oh
or a
yeah.
VHS kind of movie that people will have
No,
made his money from
no,
that big time.
no doubt about it. And I don't know. I think it's in some ways it is a tough sell because as much as like guys like us find this kind of stuff amusing and fun, for your general audience who will go see a horror movie every once in a while, some of this movie is pretty grim. It's pretty, some of it's a little ugly. I mean, it's beautiful, but the subject matter is ugly. Some of the
Mm.
character stuff is ugly, so it's not an easy sell. And I think that's probably why they release it, late August, which has always been a dumping ground. Um, and yeah, this definitely had a shelf life though, because I'm sure it did well on video. And for me, it was just on cable all the time. It was on, whatever, Cinemax or the movie channel, whatever it was. So I just watched. It was just one of those movies where we didn't have streaming back then or VOD, so you just kind of watch what was on, and this was like always on, so I was like always watching.
If we want, it's just say we're studio head, we're a streaming company or theatrical or whatever, and we want to bring this back in a the story of Harry Dear Moore,
Mm,
specifically something like Lord of Illusions. How do we want to bring this back? Do we want to bring it back as theatrical movie? Do we want to create another stab at that, or do we want to go TV route? Because I think that that character, especially as we said, as I mentioned before, is just prime for a great series. And I
yeah.
think if you bring back like start off maybe with the Lord of Illusion thing, or maybe you can have Nyx as kind of like a background character, kind of like a what's that guy's name from the Harry Potter series that Ray Fine plays?
Oh,
Um,
Voldemort.
you're kind of like that kind of thing, like he's always in the
Yeah.
background. Maybe at the end of that, maybe he comes up or something.
Right.
I think that
Right.
could be something great, but I think it's prime for some type of revamp in some sort of way.
Yeah, and well, I'm also thinking of like the Conjuring movies, where they're
Hmm.
kind of paranormal detectives, and we know what a huge franchise that is. I mean, if you could do sort of a spin on that with Harry D'Amour. Um, and I'm not saying rip off The Conjuring, but you could make it appealing for the same audience that goes to see the Conjuring movies, which are always big hits, you know. So I feel like you could do a movie version, but yeah, I kind of like the idea of like a Monster of the Week episodic TV show where he's, you know, maybe one week he's back in Brooklyn, maybe he's back in LA, maybe he's traveling here and there. And then yeah, like I like that idea of like Nick's being sort of the big bad that's sort of hovering over the proceedings, and you know, we're waiting for that final confrontation, almost like a Thanos in the MCU. You know, he's like kind of behind the scenes, and we're leading up to the final showdown. But yeah, I think like this kind of thing is right for that. You could come up with so many different stories. I mean, you can't have enough demons and ghosts and goblins and that kind of thing on TV.
And I think you have to base it in the 90s or the 80s because I think, I don't know about you, but when it comes to kind of like crime procedurals or mystery thrillers, mystery kind of movies that are set in the kind of like modern day, there's too many variables and elements now that kind of can spoil things like mobile internet, all that stuff. There's a lot of easy
Hmm.
fixes that can come
Oh yeah, right,
from
right.
solving the mystery, right? So I think it would be pretty cool that if you ever do stuff like that, again, you base it in the 80s, like when the book was set, or in the 90s when the movie was set. I think it will
Yeah,
work out the best that way. Anyway, that's what I
yeah.
think anyway.
He's not googling anything or checking
No,
his phone, or you know,
no.
like he's not
He's
checking
not
Google
live
Maps.
Instagramming. He's like, today I'm at the Mahova Desert, just checking out Nick's. Go to my Patreon and you can see the
Right.
exclusive live stream. None of that
Yeah, let me put the
crap, you know?
GoPro on and get
Yeah.
in there. No, yeah, I agree. I think that is the way to go, because also there's something more fun about that time period than
Yeah.
now. I mean, we're all just sick of our modern lives, and it's like something quaint about going back to the 90s, which, you know, to me again doesn't feel that long ago, but
Mm.
as we're talking about it, man, it does start to feel like it was ages ago.
Yeah. Well, I know it's ages ago because more people I talk to now at movie theaters, a lot of them are born like post 9/11.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
actually my son actually said to me, we listened to this podcast called Mysterious World. It's like a podcast that deals with all sorts of like paranormal stuff and all that. And I said to scroll through the episode feed and you choose an episode you want to have. And he's looking and goes, "What's 9/11?" And I was like
Oh
to
boy,
explain to him what that was. So that's where we are now in our lives, right?
that is
So
crazy. Yeah. Oh
yeah,
my God.
it is crazy. But yeah, 95 was a good year. Like I know we'll say it was a rough year for horror, but we did have this movie, we did have In the Mouth of Madness. There was a couple of gems in there. And I'm so
Yeah.
happy, Eric, that you can return and talk to me about Lord of Illusions because to me, it's a film that's always I've good nostalgia with this movie. It's a movie
Yeah.
that I remember watching it over and over. And when I watched it again, I was reminded just how much I enjoyed the film. Scott Bakula, Famke Janssen, especially the
Yeah.
scenes with Nyx in the desert. I mean, those
Hmm.
are some crazy scenes, really were. Like the beginning of this film is fantastic. It really is.
It's
And
really
like I
intense.
said,
Yeah.
the whole kind of film noir meets, horror meets, kind of like supernatural magic elements and all that great
Yeah.
concoction that Clive Barker put together here.
Yep.
So yeah, Eric, I thank you again very much for joining me today. For everyone listening, check out the show notes. I have links to all of Eric's work and also our previous conversation about In the Mouth of Madness. But yeah, Eric, thank you very much again, and yeah, I hope we talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Matt. I enjoy talking to you, and I enjoy revisiting these movies that I've, you know, seen so many times before. But you know, last two times when I jumped on here to talk to you, I rewatched them right before we talked, and it's always like, you know, it's fun because it's like I'm trying to watch it with new eyes, fresh eyes, but
Mm.
also bringing all the memories I have watching it, you know, 100 times before. And you know, these movies never get old. They're classics. I think, in my eyes, they're classics for a reason.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.